This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability for educational and non-commercial use only.
We looked at feedstock regionalization and consolidation. The purpose of this was, again, to look at feedstock regionalization and consolidation, specifically in regards to green organics. And to give you a few definitions, feedstock means waste materials as manufacturing inputs. Green organics can mean food waste, yard waste, or food and yard waste. Regionalization means standardizing practice, services, facilities, and equipment over an area. And consolidation is the aggregation of feedstock into one or a few locations. So for the methods, we looked at 3 case studies: Delaware Solid Waste Authority, Massachusetts, and King County, Washington. And we were asked to look into a few different areas within each of those, and we're going to focus today's presentation on regionalization and consolidation efforts, legal entities, and funding sources. After all of this, we're going to go into the industry research and look at local green yard waste loads, solid waste facility distribution, local green recycling practices, and green recycling industry stars. So to begin, we compile a lot of information on the types of regional organizations that can exist. I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see that there are pros and cons associated with each of them, and I'll go into slightly more detail on a few of them. So for the Delaware Solid Waste Authority, or DSWA, a little background: they were established in, this is the wrong slide, they were established in 1975 by state law. The EPA at this time was regulating sanitary landfills, and
Are you good?
no, it was just the wrong presentation.
It's because you made edits before.
And didn't save it.
And, yeah.
Okay. So ignore some of this information. Sorry. They were established in 1975 by state law. And at this time, the EPA was regulating sanitary landfills, and so we're upping the requirements in order for it to be called a landfill. And so prior to this, there were a lot of smaller areas that just had county or city dumps. And so because these are all having to be closed, DSWA was created to establish an actual sanitary landfill for all of these smaller areas to take their garbage to. So they were given the power to site and develop landfills, own property, build and operate facilities, and manage waste in general in Delaware, which means that they have the ability to regulate haulers. They are a nonprofit, they are not a state agency, and they are overseen by the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. So regionalization, again, for Delaware means the management of solid waste on a state level. From this, DSWA is supposed to create a statewide solid waste management plan, and stemming from this, to look at consolidation a little more closely, the Universal Recycling Law was put in effect. And so this means that every hauler in the state has to provide recycling services along with their garbage collection. This, in effect, has created consolidation because there's only one MRF in this entire state, and so all of the recycling has to go to that one facility. And then there's also a landfill ban for the state on yard waste, but since there's not only one location, there's no law requiring curbside collection, there's no consolidation of this waste. For funding, they get small royalties from the sale of recyclables. They sell landfill gas to the grid, and they manage a small construction, demolition, and recycling area. For Massachusetts, regionalization was established for many reasons, mostly for economies of scale, funding opportunities, and additional cost savings. They have the right, individual areas have the right by law to handle various municipal issues, and the law states that any area can, any service that an individual area can perform on its own, it can perform jointly with other areas. And so from this, there are 2 types of regionalization for Massachusetts in regards to solid waste. The first is regional refuse disposal districts, and the second is joint recycling programs. The first, regional refuse disposal districts, district committees are formed, and these district committees have the right to govern the district, and they then determine the funding source for it. The second are joint recycling programs, and an intermunicipal agreement that is created, and from that agreement, the governance structure and funding source is then determined. And so, to go a little bit into legal entities, as I just discussed, those two types of agreements are formed, and the type of committee that can be formed is again determined by the agreement, so it varies. The Department of Environmental Protection also has to be consulted before either of these are pursued. The funding for these, there comes from a lot of sources, so I'm going to mention a few. The levying of fees for solid waste collection and disposal, grants to different areas for regional efforts, because they're more likely to get funding if they are regionalized versus individual areas, and membership fees. King County, Washington is the last case study. So every area within King County and within the state, I believe, has to create their own solid waste management plans. So each county also has to develop a county-wide one, and each individual city and municipality can either create their own or opt into the county plan. And so every municipality within King County, except for Seattle and Milton, have opted into this plan. So the county is in charge of operating disposal services. So while each individual municipality has to handle their own collection and hauling, the county is in charge of making sure there are facilities available. So almost every area within King County has curbside collection of yard waste. I think it's 1% doesn't. And so there's actually a consolidation of yard waste, as there's one facility or one contractor that it all goes to. The legal entities are interlocal agreements between the individual areas and King County, and the funding mainly comes from disposal and tipping fees. I'm going to quickly go over some pros and cons. I'm not going to read through all of them, but some of the most important pros are that through regionalization, you can often give a higher quality of service, and more services can be offered. You can provide greater convenience. It could be easier to have educational opportunities if you have a standardized service across an entire area. Some of the cons, the most important to me, is possible inequalities of costs and benefits. So if you have, for instance, a regional landfill and it's in one municipality's area, then they could see increased air pollution or increased traffic, and that could burden them more than the other areas. Additionally, you can see some policies and goals might be different between the two or more areas that are regionalized, and so you have to be able to negotiate what is important to each in order to proceed. And I will hand it off to Tomasz.
So the first slide talks a little bit about the waste loads per city. You have 12 largest cities, actually, by population.